last night you just turned your podium, your lectern around and did that. Mm-hmm. So, but he said about 6 inches away from it, something like that.
Okay. Very good.
I think it's live.
Oh, they have my thing there already.
Yeah.
Which one is bigger? Print. That one. Oh, bless your heart. Thank you. Now, do you need this back?
No, you're welcome.
That's quite a paper. Wow, that's 50 pages. Thank you.
Actually, for me, this is short.
Yeah.
I've learned to make them shorter so people read them.
Right, right. No, thank you so much. Thank you. This will be a treasure to read, just like the other ones.
I actually have a lot of material on that, yeah, those are probably universal ones. Well, I think many of them.
Good evening, everyone. Let's go ahead and find seats. We'll get started in just a minute. Got some folks still coming in. Well, it's good to see everyone on this very fine Friday evening, and we're glad that you came and that you're interested in the history of our church here, going back to 1895. It's hard to believe. But we are going to see a presentation tonight of our history. It is based on the book that Rich Gibson spent quite an amount of time putting together. Some of you have gotten that, and it has a lot of cool pictures in it and a lot of neat history from our church. So we're going to get started, and I know that Rich is anxious to get started, and there's some surprises for you tonight, and I hope that you enjoy the program. Father, thank you for our church and for the rich history that it has. I pray that as we gather together tonight, Lord, you would just fill us with joy over what you have done through First Evangelical Free Church over these many years. In Jesus' name, amen.
This one then. Okay. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy this presentation tonight. Worked on it for some time, and hopefully it'll give you a little bit of history of the church and how we got to be where we are today and what God has done through over 125 years, really 127 now. And, well, okay, now this is working. So this is a picture of the Boulder Street Church that was doctored up a little bit. Hold that. Okay. I don't do this for a living, sorry. Is this not working? Oh, there it goes. Okay, so we had him. So if you haven't found your seat yet, and you want a better seat, you can look for one here. So the minutes of the church that were translated shows that the name of the church was actually the First Swedish God's Free Mission. If you can't read that there, this is what it actually says, and that was in 1895 is when they put that in their minutes. Guess there's a little bit of a delay on this. So at this time we'll have Don Wilkin come and talk a little bit about how this project came about. Don?
Well, as many of you know, we have been in our relocation journey for almost 9 years now. In November, it'll be 9 years. And during the last few years, we've had discussions with appraisers and realtors and buyers. And each of those times, or many of those times, I wanted to put together a brief history of our church so that they would know a little bit about who we were. And so it was quite a job, talking with Shirley or Pat Lands or Pat Hardiman, trying to pull together what various people had written about our church, sometimes going to the church office and looking up records. So after I had done that for about the third or fourth time, it occurred to me that it would really be nice if someone could pull together in a very formal way our church history. And so I'm thinking, who is a bit of a historian, and who has published a book, and who enjoys this kind of things? And before I'm even finished thinking about it, of course, Rich came to mind. So we had some discussions over a period of time, and finally he agreed to pull together this book. And I know it's early, but I would like for you to join me in thanking Rich for the hundreds of hours that he has spent doing this book. So it's my great joy to be a part of this tonight and turn it over back to Rich, and just thank you again for what you've done here.
Thanks. Thank you, Don. So the next slide shows the EFCA national office in Minneapolis, and we have a video that the president has sent to be played at this time.
Well, friends at First Free in Colorado Springs, on behalf of the entire EFCA as a movement of churches and our more than 500 missionaries around the world, congratulations for 125 years of faithful and fruitful ministry there in Colorado Springs. In fact, you have the opportunity as a church to have this incredible book that Rich Gibson has put together of the history of your church, to be able to see in photographs and with stories what God has done over 125 years. As we think about what he's done in the past, it's important for us to look back and with hearts of thanksgiving and celebration, and to see where he's planted you now in Colorado Springs, the impact you have in your community and from your church, literally in so many other places in the region there, in the Rocky Mountain District, and literally around the world through missions ministries. And yet it's looking forward as well. I wonder, what will First Free Church in Colorado Springs look like in another 100 or 125 years? What will the impact be in the lives of individuals and families? People like over the last 125 years, where people have come to faith in Christ and they've grown deep in their faith and their lives have been transformed. That kind of ministry continuing on into the future to the glory of God. Congratulations on the ministry that God has called you to, and looking back on 125 faithful years and looking ahead with faith to what God will do. May the Lord bless you, and may he bring great joy into your lives as you celebrate what he's done, both in a celebration service and through this incredible book that Rich has put together for you. Bless you.
So one thing leads to another, as you know, and in my initial research and talking to people like Shirley and Pat, I wondered if there was a historian that possibly the national office has, so I contacted the EFCA and found out that they do have an historian, or archivist as he's called. Have to wait for these to catch up, I guess. Okay. This is Dr. Tom Carnes, and he and I worked together, collaborated on this project over probably 18, 19 months, and we probably have 200-300 emails, and he essentially served as my chief editor. He reviewed everything I had written in my book that I put together, and one of the things that he provided that I wasn't aware of, because I asked him about photographs that he possibly had for earlier pictures of our church. The earliest one we had on record in a book was 1934. And so this page here from a publication they had dated 1914. The picture in the middle is actually our church. So we don't know whether that was taken in 1910 or 1902 or whatever. All we know is it predates 1914 and is the earliest known photo that I could find of the church. So that being said, I wish to acknowledge two people tonight. This is actually showing, insert another slide. There are some mysteries to solve too, but I wanted to acknowledge Shirley and Pat Hardiman and Pat Lance. Pat Lance is living in Canyon City in an assisted living home, but the other two are here tonight. So you're out here, just wave your hand and see Shirley. I don't know where Pat is. Okay. So without their information and research that they have done, the book wouldn't be what it is today. I know I went through a bunch of Pat's photo albums that she had because I was looking for an old photo of her from the 1950s when she first came to the church. In fact, I think actually she came in 47. And Shirley, I think, told me she came in 52. And I think Pat Lance about that same time. So anyways, I went through about 20 albums to find an old photo of Pat, and Shirley eventually came up with one too. And so I have those put here, and then Pat Lance, when she got married in 1956 at the Boulder Street Church. So the next slide shows a couple of young ladies in Sweden and a gentleman there, and that's where the church really started out, that people immigrated from the country of Sweden primarily, and they congregated they came together in a Bible study, and as I read, it was more like 1885, and so for a number of years, they just continued to meet, and then eventually decided that they wanted to build a church. So the next slide shows you actually the book that I put together, which there's a couple of copies of that in the church library, and I may be ordering some more if enough people want to actually purchase a copy and place a second order. And so some people have asked me how sales have gone, and I should have got a better sales staff, as you can see. And so with that being said, let's head on down the road and start this presentation. So this shows an old stereo card from around 1900 showing the homeland where many of these people came from. The photo on the left is actually from Lois Pankratz, that she served in Sweden for 18 years. And I was hoping she could be here tonight, but she had a lot of other commitments and couldn't make it. So with that being said, this is a verse that I happened on, and I thought it really depicted what these people went through in coming to America. And if you can't read that, it says, "You left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." And that's in Ruth. And so we wonder sometimes, and especially in doing my project, what was it like when these Swedish people came over to America, and specifically to Colorado Springs, and they first came to the church on Boulder Street. And that was in, like I say, the 1890s. This is a photo of around 1880s, and I got this actually from the First Presbyterian Church. And so with that being said, if those people were here today, we would wonder what they would say and what stories they might tell. So there's a, where are my people? So here's one of them today. And that's Reverend J.E. Anderson, the first pastor of the church. So he's unlocking the door to the church so he can let the people in for a Sunday morning service. And here comes John Bloomquist and his wife, Hilma. Hello, ladies. A couple more Swedish ladies that are coming. And oh, here comes another one from a different part of town. So as they're getting seated in the church, we'll move on to the next slide, which shows the Bible in the church from 1891. Okay, there it is. Whoops. Oops, that's the songbooks. This is the old Bible, and that should be on display in the reception area tonight if anybody wants to look through that. It's rather heavy and thick, but it's written in Swedish. And then the next slide shows the songbooks that they used at that time, and that was one thing that I confirmed with the archivist in Minneapolis, that he said, yes, many of the Swedish churches, this is what they used. And then a lot of the things that we had in our archives here, this is just a few of the records that were available to look through. And this shows a photo of the early 1900s of Colorado Springs. And as it had started to grow, I think about that time there was about 20,000 people there. And here's the first picture, first photo of the church again, with the lady added for emphasis, and giving you the name that the First Swedish God's Free Mission. And on the right is a listing of the pastors that was in the records. Some of the pastors we have pictures of, and some we do not. Like for Reverend Anderson, we do not have his picture, but these we do, so we don't know what that first pastor actually looked like, but these are 3 of them. And so with that being said, we'll give Reverend Anderson a chance to tell us a little bit about his story.
Good evening. They call me the Reverend J.E. Anderson. I am from Sweden. I have learned a little English so that I can tell you a little bit about myself and about this church that you are now enjoying the benefits of. I came from Sweden, ended up in Chicago for several years, and then from Chicago came to Colorado Springs. And by the way, I look all over for springs, did not find any. I joined the Swedish group, and we met for a few years in people's homes, studying the Bible and singing together. It was a marvelous time, but our church grew. The numbers grew. So we started meeting in the Legion Hall. And after a little while in the Legion Hall, we thought it would be so nice to have our own church, a church of our own. And at that moment, a friend in the groups named Lars, he said, I know a place on Boulder Street that they are selling. Perhaps we can buy it for our church. So I went down to Boulder Street, looked over this property. It looked just right for the size of a church. It was perfect, but sort of like the Springs, no boulders, just a little hill. I don't understand how they named these places here. So I get the group together and I say, we have very little dinero. Yeah, I speak a little Spanish too. And Lars piped up and said, yeah, but I know of a Mr. Stratton, who's a very wealthy man. He has gold fields up in the mountains. And he's already given much money to other things here in the city. Perhaps he would be willing to loan us some money. So being the bold man that I was, the next day I went to this Mr. Stratton and I said, Mr. Stratton, would you be able to drum up $1,000 to loan us so that we can build a church for the Swedish community? And he said, well, I've already given this community money for a post office. I've given money for a courthouse and for a county building, which is now the Pioneer Museum, by the way. So I can surely give the Swedish community the $1,000 to build your church. So that is most of the story. I think the people like that I found the money to build the first church, so they asked if I would be their pastor. In December of 1895, we made a contract for me to be their pastor for 3 years. And I said, sounds good to me. So I started preaching, and then in March of the next year of 1896, during a congregational meeting, I find out that some people did not like my preaching. And some people didn't like me. Well, I no like to stay where people no like me. So at the end of that month of March 1896, I resigned. I had family and friends in Las Animas, which means the encouragement, and I thought maybe that's where I need to move. My wife was very pregnant, but she's a good Swedish woman, so we move anyway. But that move not work out so good for us. Soon after we arrived in Las Animas, my wife gave birth to twins, and a little later, one of the twins died before we could even name her. And 9 days later, the other twin died. A couple of months later, I became very sick. The doctor said, I don't know what to do. And very shortly after that, I died of appendicitis.
Thank you for that story, Reverend Anderson. And that's all factual from what I was able to learn and research. And that was one of the mysteries that I was somewhat able to solve. And on the screen now is a picture of Winfield Stratton, who did give the money for the first building on Boulder Street. And you may also know that the Myron Stratton home is on the south part of town. Most of you are probably familiar with that. And that's still going. That was started Mr. Stratton died in 1902, and he left in his will most of the money to build this home, and it was for poor people and for children and others as well, and it's still going. So that being said, there's a little bit more information about Reverend Anderson, and again, this was through the help of the archivist Tom in Minneapolis, that there were some articles in the Evangelical Beacon, which is the newsletter of the E-Free Church for many years, or was, and there were 2 articles, one in 1936, one in 37, and I know you can't read those there, and they are shown in the book as well. The other thing that was critical in finding out about Reverend Anderson, in the next slide, is this handwritten note that I found in the archives, and it says that Reverend Anderson was the first pastor, and then he went to Mr. Stratton for a loan and got the gift. And then interesting thing was it said that he was here for those 3 months, and then he left for Las Animas, where he passed away later. And I thought, in my other research, I had learned that he had come from actually Evanston, Illinois. I think he went to Moody Bible Institute for a while, and then he came back to Colorado Springs and wanted to serve the congregation. And in any event, I assumed that it was health was the reason that he left, and I could find nothing more in any of the information I had. And so I finally thought, well, I wonder if there's something in those original minutes that I can't read because I can't read Swedish. And so during one of Lois Pankrat's visit here, who was a missionary in Sweden for 18 years, she and I got together and she read those minutes again. And sure enough, it's just what Reverend Anderson said, that there was a divided congregation on wanting to retain the pastor, Reverend Anderson. And that's what happened to him. And you know, in researching the records in Bend County and Las Animas, I found there was only about 20 people in that community that had passed away that year. And the first one I looked at was the child of Reverend Anderson, and it said died of diphtheria. And then 9 days later, same thing. And then a month and a half later, Reverend Anderson passed away of appendicitis. And I thought, well, then it wasn't really health reasons why he left here. So, you know, Lois was a great help in being able to solve that mystery. So with that being said, now that the cat's out of the bag and you see who the mystery guests are, we'll move on to the next slide. And so in 1897, they renamed the church the Swedish Evangelical Free Mission. And then John Blomquist, who immigrated to America in 1904 and 1905, and I regress a little bit because long story, short story, the short of it is that, hold on, go back to this. So anyways, in talking to Donna Spear, who is here tonight, she told me to talk to Bob Spear, who lived down in the Broadmoor area. So I went to visit him one day, and we talked a while and got some information. And then, you know, he told me that his grandfather had come over at that time period and so forth. And he says, well, I don't know if you want to hear the whole story about how my grandfather was a stowaway from Sweden and everything. So he told me that whole story, and I won't go into that now. But it is in the book, and we're going to ask John to tell us a little bit more about what happened.
My name is Jan Blomqvist, and Rich has asked me to come and talk about how I came to America and to be a member of the church. I am happy to do this, but just a little nervous. So I was born Jan Nilsson, and in Sweden I worked on a farm. I wasn't very good with cows and horses, but I was very strong. I could carry heavy rocks from the field and pitch hay with the fork and dig ditches. One day the farmer said to me that I was very good with the shovel and that I had a long career ahead of me digging ditches. I was pleased with the compliment, but only a little. Then the farmer got conscripted into the Swedish army, and he didn't want to go. So I volunteered to go in his place because I would get better pay and see the world. In the army, they gave me a test to see what I could do, and then they handed me a shovel. Only I wasn't digging ditches, I was digging trenches and latrines. After a year in the army, I got leave to go back to my hometown, and there I met Helma Peterson again. Helma and I had been close friends since childhood, and we were still close friends, but now she was different. She was beautiful, the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. So one day, I asked her to marry me, and she said no, because her family was poor and I was poor with no prospects except for digging with the shovel. Helma and her friend had a plan that they would stow away aboard the steamship bound for America, where they would soon become rich. I said I would go down to the docks and see her off. She said that would be nice. On the dock, she said goodbye, and then she kissed me. And for a long time, I stood there, looking off where she had gone. But then somebody yelled at me to get back to work and pointed at a large pile of boxes. So I carried the box up into the galley of the ship, and then I carried another one and another. Somebody yelled, all ashore that's going ashore, but I didn't go. I couldn't move, but the ship moved, and then it began a gentle rolling. For a long time, I wandered through the bowels of that ship, down long passages with steam pipes, and strange sounds, and all the while the air was getting hotter. Finally, I opened the hatch and I saw the furnaces, and there were men there standing by an air pipe, so I went over and joined with them. From time to time, a man would take a shovel and throw coal into the furnaces. I watched what they did, and after a while I did it too. And then I just kept on doing it. One day, the engineer was looking at me funny. I think he knew that I wasn't one of his stokers, but he didn't say a word, maybe because I was so good with the shovel, and because he was a man short. Down in the engine room, the temperature can be 180 degrees. Sometimes a man would go crazy with the heat and then just jump overboard. Well, a man named Blomqvist had done that. After a while, the engineer started calling me Blomqvist, so I became Blomqvist. And when the ship docked, I even got his payslip. At Ellis Island in New York, I saw Helma again. I went and stood by her in the line. When she got to the table, the man sitting there asked if she had relatives in America and where she was going. She said she had a cousin in Chicago. I said, that is a coincidence. I am going to Chicago too. So I bought us tickets on the train and we went to Chicago. And there she found work as a maid, and I found work in the stockyards with the shovel. But then I met the man who was starting a cement finishing business. He said he could use a good worker like me, and would I be interested? Well, that was skilled labor and better pay, so I said I would. And then he used to happen to mention that his first job was in Colorado Springs. And I said, where the heck is that? But it turned out okay. In my letters, I was telling Helma how beautiful it was, and how I was learning the cement business, and how sometimes I would work in the coal mine with the shovel. Finally, I had enough money to send for Helma, and then we were married, and then we had children. And then we became members of the Swedish church. And then the Swedish church became what you see here tonight. I think it is a nice church, even though the sermons are in English. I believe that God can understand what we say in English, though, of course, He would prefer to hear it in Swedish. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Somehow in my book, I don't remember talking about a shovel. But it was a good story anyways. So moving on to the next slide, we've already been through this, but as he came as a stowaway on a ship bound for America and landed in Ellis Island. And then here you can see a little bit of history, and I won't take time to go through all that, but the picture second to the right, or from the right, is a cement finishing crew, and that was given, or I scanned that photo from Bob Spear, in which he said John Blomqvist was the third person from the right, and several of the other members that are in that photo actually attended this church as well. And then on another occasion that I went back to see him and to go over the story that I had put together, and we kind of tweaked it a bit, he says, well, hold on a minute, I think I've got another photo up in my bedroom. And he came down with the one in the far right. And in that photo, which he said was taken about 1940, is John and Hilma Blomqvist in the middle, and on the left is Edna and Arnold on the right. Well, Edna attended this church for a lot of years, and in the bottom right, we see Edna and Guy Spear, and that photo was given to me by Donna Spear, and she said it was about 1985, and then the other photo is from the church directory. So that's how the Bloomquists got to be in the church, and then the other information there. I know Bob did not know when his grandparents got married. So I searched the El Paso County records, marriage records, and I found in the upper left, and I realize you can't read that, but the date that they got married was 10/10/10. So I'll never forget that. And interesting to be that, to read that also is that the person officiating, the last name was Peterson, and that was Hilma's last name. So I think that also created some ties there.
Nobody called her Hilma, they called her Ruby.
Oh, really? Okay, well, thank you for that. So then the next photo, shows the marriage certificate and the house where they lived for many years. And that's on El Paso Street, I believe. Yeah. Okay. And then the photo of the Bloomquist, a close-up of that so you can see them. And then beginning in going through the records of the church, the first page that shows where the people joined, I looked through those and noticed that most of them were women. So I actually counted them up, and 20 of the 25 first members were women. And so we don't know what a church meeting would have looked like, but maybe something like this. And if you're amazed by that, you may have looked like this. I think most people recognize that person. So moving on, one of the things, or one of the people that was listed there was Carlotta. And that's how that is pronounced from what I'm told by Lois. And in any event, about a year and a half ago, I had my friend and I went down to the Boulder Street Church and tried to reenact a scene of what it would look like on a Sunday morning at the service. It happened to snow a few inches before the night before. And so at this point, Carlotta is going to tell us a little bit about her experience in coming to the church. Carlotta, I think you're going to have to use this. I know you're not used to this device.
What is it? Oh,
It's called a microphone.
a microphone. What does it do?
Well, the people will be able to hear you a lot better.
It
protects
makes
your
it
voice.
louder?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Give it a
Talk.
try.
Talk so make it.
Yeah,
Oh, well, does it go in here?
yes.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, so now you can hear me? Yes? Yeah, thank you. Talk. Well, good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here with you this evening to celebrate the history of this beautiful church. And I might say that I have been waiting for this evening for about 125 years. For I was one of the very first members of the church. At that time, I was only 21 years old, and that was in 1897, 2 years after the church organized. So, because I was such an early member, Mr. Gibson has asked me to share with you a little of what it was like to immigrate from my homeland and to come alone as a single woman and find a new life here in Colorado Springs and to find my place and my home in your church and what it was like in the church at that time. So my story really begins when I was a young girl of about 9 years of age. Right before I turned 9, I lost both of my parents, my mother and my father, and I was also an only child. So it was a very difficult time. But during that time, I felt God was with me, even as a little child. And I believed that He was my protector and that He would be with me throughout my life. Well, some friends of the family then raised me until I became a young woman. And at the age of about 17 or 18, I still did not quite feel at home, a part of their family. And so I was a little bit ready to strike out on my own. But I will tell you, the thought of it was frightening. Well, there were a few people in my church and in my little village of Norra Sweden who were talking about immigrating to the United States. And I could not imagine going across the big ocean and coming to a new country, but I was excited about the idea. And so I started to pray about it, and I prayed and I prayed. And I came to the place that once again I committed to believe that God would be with me no matter where I lived, even if I was still alone. So I got my courage up, and I got on that big ocean liner, and I came across the Atlantic, landed in New York City. Oh my goodness, New York City. I was so overwhelmed. It was so big and so busy. I knew in my heart this was not the place for me to spend my life, because I loved the beauty of Sweden and the mountains and the green and the ocean, the waterways. And so I knew I would not stay very long, and I only stayed about a year and a half while I worked and made some money. Then I started hearing people talking about going west. And I thought, what is this west? And then I heard it was the wild, wild west. And I thought, if I went there, would I only see cowboys and saloons? Or would I have to live in a log cabin? I did not know. But my heart called me, especially when they talked about the mountains and the fresh, clean air. I knew that was the kind of place I wanted to make my home. So once again, I prayed, and I prayed, and I got my courage up. This time I boarded a train. I rode the train through Chicago and stayed just a little while, and that was no good neither. So I came all the way west to Denver, and then I got on a coach with some horses, and they brought me to Colorado Springs. And I lived out my life in this beautiful country. I knew as soon as I stepped off the carriage, when I saw the beautiful mountains and the peak that you call Pikes, and I knew that this was going to be my home if I could find one other thing. I needed to find my brothers and sisters in Christ. I needed a place where I could worship and feel at home and serve my Lord. So, this was the first week I was in Colorado Springs, and it had snowed. And I stayed at the Antlers Hotel, and I asked everyone I saw, do you know of a Swedish-speaking congregation in the city? And they told me there was one down on the Boulder Street. So Sunday morning came, my very first Sunday in the Springs. And I got out my very best hat, and I put on my favorite Sunday dress, and I walked all the way to the Boulder Street Church in the snow and the mud and the slush, because we all had dirty streets, right? And I came to the Boulder Street Church. And when I walked up, I was so excited because first I saw buggies and horses all lined up on Boulder Street in front of the church, and then on the side street. And I thought, this is wonderful. They have so many people in the church. And I've walked up and met the pastor, and he was so kind and made me feel so welcome. I walked through the door, and when I did, I knew I had come home. I would like to share, well, let me tell you this before I go on. I loved the church. It was beautiful. But there was one problem with the church. Almost all of the members were women. And I thought, where are all the men? So we women got to know each other, and we did not like that situation. So we started working, and we baked cookies, and we took them out into the neighborhoods, and we fed the children and the mamas, and we tucked the mamas into Bible studies, and then we started doing stories for the children in the neighborhood, and before long, you know what happened? The mamas started coming to the church. And where mamas go, children go. And where children go, the papas follow. So we had families with men coming to the church. And the church began to grow and to be effective in the neighborhoods and in the communities of Colorado Springs. And I hear that since then, that you even have built another building, and that it has grown, and it made baby churches out in other parts of Colorado Springs, and they have grown, and the church has served the Lord for these 125 years. And I'm so thankful to have been a part of the early days of this church. We have a Swedish hymn writer who lived in Sweden her whole life. In fact, she was known as the Fanny Crosby of Sweden because she wrote over 1,700 hymns for the church. I would like to sing my testimony for you tonight of how God gave me the courage to leave my homeland and come as a young single woman and find a new life and a new congregation in Colorado Springs. I think you will recognize this song. And this was written by our Carolina Sandelberg, who is the Fanny Crosby of Sweden. Day by day, and with each passing moment, strength I find to meet my trials here, trusting in my Father's wise bestowment. I've no cause for worry or for fear. He whose heart is kind beyond all measure gives unto each day what he deems best. Lovingly, it's part of pain or pleasure, mingling toil with peace and rest.
Bekymmer vill han bära, han som
jag nått det goda land. I would like to invite you to sing with your Swedish brothers and sisters to connect us to the past. Just that last verse, and you have to try to read the Swedish. Well, we don't have all of the Swedish words up there, so let's sing it as it is. No, that won't work. Will the words scroll? Okay, so do you see where the Swedish words are? We will sing those words. I will tell you, S-J-A-L-P is yelp, help. Here we go. Sing it the best that you can. Hjälp mig då att vila tryggt och stilla, blott vid dina löften, Herrens hand. I min tro och ej din tröst förspilla, som i ordet mig föredrar. Till you meet the promised land. And I want to tell you one last thing. The Lord took me home from the earth in 1945. And I want you who are left behind to know that your eyes have not seen, nor have your ears heard the glory and the joy that is set before you. God bless you as you continue the work of this church from my day to this and into the future.
Thank you for that message and song, Carlotta. So the next slide, moving on, in a bit of the history, one of the things that I discussed with the archivist in Minneapolis is he was interested in the other free churches in town too, that 3 of the 4 at the time that First Free had actually started. In fact, my wife and I actually helped start each of those as well. But in any event, I had told him that I did a fair amount of travel, and he says, well, I'd really appreciate it if in your travels and so forth that you would send me pictures of the other churches if you get the opportunity. So I did that for about 18 months, and I actually got 87 churches for him. And I have 2 pages in the book that's devoted to, shows you a sampling of those. Well, one of the churches that I went to was up in Divide on a Sunday morning, and I happened to be looking at their history and so forth, and they had this poster on the wall. And it was from 1931, and I recognized the name, or at least I thought I did. And when I got back home, I looked it up, and sure enough, the pastor that was doing the revival meeting had been to our church on 3 different occasions, was the pastor. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence, and he was Carl J.E. Nelson. And so again, that was a surprise to a lot of people. And then moving on, the list of pastors, as I went through and I was trying to locate pictures of all that I could find, and I found a good number of them that are in the book. But there was one that I came across that it shows here that he was in Colorado Springs, but he wasn't listed here. And so I did some further research and went to the Pikes Peak Library, and the next slide shows the, here's where the minute books shows that he actually became a member in 1926. And then the next slide shows you from the library in the Polk City Directory that he was listed as the pastor here. So for some reason, he was omitted from that list of pastors that was in our record books. And so that was another mystery that I wasn't really looking for, but it did turn up. And then just to give you an idea, but when the young people first started, the youth groups and so forth, this indicates that in 1908 they first started. And then in 1925, the minutes showed that there was a baptismal service in Prospect Lake, which I had no idea of. And there were 4 girls that were baptized during that time. And then here's one of the things that I had noticed, that there was records pretty much from 1950s on, but before that there were basically no photos and not a lot of information of what was going on other than reading the minutes. But I did find this one photo, and it was kind of a Christmas card greeting that the pastor at the time had, I guess, given to the church, and at least ended up in the church archives. And that's when he served. And this is a photo that was in another publication, a book dated 1934, and the people were added there for emphasis. So that was probably the earliest photo before I found the one from the National Archives. And here's the Bloomquist, and shows the time frame as to when they came to the church, including Bob and Donna and so forth. And this is one thing that I didn't know either, that even though our church had started 3 churches here since 1972, there was another free church that was started called Emmanuel Free Church in 1941. And but it, of course, didn't materialize too well. And then this is an old photo I found from 1954, and that was Peg Mead, the pastor's wife, and Pat Albaugh at the time, which is now Pat Hardiman. And I believe they were simulating George and Martha Washington at some event. And then there were 2 photos that showed the Mother's Day celebrations, and one 1954 and the other 1956. And then in 1956, the record shows that the name of the church was changed finally to the First Evangelical Free. And this is a gavel that I found in the archives, and the note that was with it shows that it was actually Abby Leonard had made the gavel, and she made it for Pat Hardiman's husband, Jim Albaugh. And so I believe it's on display tonight too. And this is an attendance roll that probably a lot of you have seen before in the early days, and this was actually in the old church. And here's a photo of the old church from 1958, and through Shirley Sampson I got a hold of Gary Leonard, which lives in the state of Washington near Seattle, and he told me that he printed 200 of these little photos, and they were distributed in the bulletins back in 1958, shortly before they moved out of the church. And wouldn't you know, I only found 2 of those photos. Who knows what happened to the rest of them. This was a slide, on the left is a slide that I found that I think Pastor Headland had taken that. And of course the steeple was missing from it. And so in the process of trying to make that whole, I contacted a cousin of mine who is a professional photographer down in the Houston area, and he put the steeple back on and added the blue clouds, blue skies and everything, and that's what I have it on the front of the book. And this is one of my favorite photos that is in the book, and I call it the 1950s reunion. So it shows the church with the steeple added back, and of course you can read the name of the church on that. And this is one where I had actually my daughter superimpose the people from photos I had accumulated from the 1950s, except for Edna and Guy Spear. That was more like the 1985 photo, But the rest of them is how they actually appeared in the 1950s. And wouldn't that be interesting if they could all have a reunion together at the old church? And this is when they moved out. I found this record also at the library, and it says that the Unity Church is who actually purchased the building in 1958, and a little bit of a description about it. And then after they moved out, the congregation met at the YWCA downtown, which is still there. And that's a recent photo of it. I did actually go down there and took some pictures, and in the library, I found these articles too that was in a scrapbook that they had for the Y. And here's some other photos I took. They have one of these hand-cranked elevators that's still working there. And the photo on the bottom left is a picture from the 1950s as well, probably about the time they were meeting there. That was in those old slides as well. And then the property, before we built on it, the church was given the name Pleasant Valley Free Church, which was, a lot of people didn't know that. Reverend Mead was the pastor at that time. And then John Headland, shown in this picture, became the next pastor, and the name was changed to Westmore Park Evangelical Free. And then originally, the church was to look like this. That was the architectural rendering of what it was to look like. And in talking to John Headland, Pastor Headland's son, he gave me the story about that as to how and why they changed that, but I won't take time to go into that right now. But you can see it's drastically different. This is during the construction phase. And this is a picture about 1959 when it was first completed, and they first met in that multipurpose gymnasium building. And here was a service, and again, John told me this was not the dedication or anything like that. It was some other event that was going on. And this photo is from 1962 as to what it looked like in the old gym back at that time. And then one thing that I wanted to do was to get inside the old Boulder Street Church. And so I went down there one evening, and some lady had pulled up in the alley behind and had stopped, and I went and talked to her and learned that there was another group that owned the church now, and she thought it was the Masons. Well, it turned out she was right, and she said they meet there every Thursday night, so I went there on a Thursday night, talked my way in, and took some photos of what it looks like. And when they started their meeting, of course, I had to leave, but at least I got some photos and a little bit of information about how they had changed the church. As you can see, the skies and the ceiling and everything. And this was an interesting slides that was in the archives. And the church competed in a contest of the floats at Christmas time, and they actually won first place with their float. And again, some people were surprised at that too. And the property was dedicated in 1958, and I believe that's the architect on the left and John Headland on the right. And then this was an interesting photo I found, and on the left is Shirley Sampson. And they're sitting on the roof of the parsonage, which is the building next door now. And that was move-in day, as I understand it. And one of the Headland girls was in the middle, I believe. And I'm not sure who the other lady was. But I guess they were taking a break on top of the roof. Barbara? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. And this is the cornerstone of the church, which probably a lot of people have never seen, but I just put that in there to show what that was. The Headland family, when they lived in the parsonage, that's their family with their 2 daughters and their son John. And then a picture in 1965 of John and Ingrid. And moving on, in 1966, Lois and Harvey Pankratz were married in the old gym, probably one of the first weddings in there. And in 1971, and this is how kind of Don and I got started on it, because he had guessed as to when the first service was in this sanctuary. And I knew specifically because I had moved out here in the Air Force in the first week of November of 1971. And when I went through the archives, I found this old church guest book, and sure enough, my wife had signed the first line. So that kind of proved it. And not only that, but the first 2 pages were all entries from that very day, and they were from other churches in town, including the LDS and Methodist and a bunch of others, and several other free churches around Colorado that people had come to be here on the first Sunday in this sanctuary. And this was this was about a month later in December is when they actually had an open house. And someone drew that picture, I guess. And I took this photo in 1972, not knowing that I would ever use it 50 years later. And here's another photo taken about that time, the front of the church. And the inside of the church, some years later, maybe in the 80s. And this was probably in the 90s, showing you how the sanctuary pulpit area has changed. And I took this photo probably in 1990s. I'm not sure when that sign was there for the church, but many years later. And then today, more what it looks like. This was taken just a few years ago. And Don wanted me to include the other free churches in town in the book that I was doing, so I did paid visits to them once again and put pictures in there of what it looks on the outside, the inside, and their pastor. So a little bit of information can be found in the book. And then this is the pastors from the beginning of 1895 on through 1950, and all the photos that I could find of those pastors and the first 2 photos of the church that were known. And then here we are from 1950 all the way up to today of each of those pastors. And some of those getting a little bit grainy. And some people would think this was an outstanding list of pastors there. That's actually Pete Simonson. Don't know if he's here tonight. And there was an Awana Grand Prix that was held actually in the sanctuary. I don't know that they asked permission to use the sanctuary, it looks like. And this is a couple pages on the youth that you can look at in the book. And some more youth conferences that they had gone to. And the Young at Heart, which has been an integral part of the church for many years. And these 2 photos actually came from Shirley Sampson as well. And this was a retreat that was held at Glen Erie in 1987. And I believe she said there was 350 ladies that attended that. And the church, or the Glen Erie, was overflowing, and they were beyond their capacity. And they came from all over the Rocky Mountain District. And this was a couple pages I have in the book about the softball team, which I was a part of for probably 3 or 4 decades at least, and some championships that we won. I also made up these photos of the most current church or softball team and put them on baseball cards, so I don't know how many have seen them. And this is the pages I was talking about before, which shows some of the other free churches that I visited around the country. And here's an event that took place many years ago. I don't know if you recognize those 2 ladies. Yeah, Annie Walters and Diane Stevens. And we once had a quartet, and we even had a quintet. And again, that was a surprise. And then for a few years, we had a ladies' Christmas banquet that was catered by the men. A lot of us participated in that, and this was some of those men that were singing at the time. And Don Wilkin had put that together for a few years. This is a more recent photo of the church as to what it looks like in the evening when there was actually people in it, because that group was meeting there that night. And this is what it looks like recently as well from the daytime. And of course, our current church, probably about 2 years ago, I took this photo and the following one. And it was interesting because when I was taking these photos and was over behind where the little parking lot is, some guy was riding by on his bicycle. And he saw me and he started yelling and waving at me. And who was it but Dennis Korth? And he says, "I'm going to call the cops on you." And that would be Dennis. So interesting, one of the things I found in there was during the Centennial Committee or celebration, this was the committee that worked on that, and I talked to 4 of those people, as well as some others, to get information and so forth, but they had a committee of 16 at that time. So moving on to the next, I want to congratulate all my players tonight that participated. So first one, Reverend J.E. Anderson, played by the one and only Jonathan Smith. And then we have John Bloomquist, played by Mike Stevens. And, go back to that one photo a minute. This is the original picture of John Bloomquist from 1940. Notice the resemblance. He did a good job of being that person. Really good job. And here's Carlotta, which was played by Claudine Little. And the extras tonight, sitting in the second row, one in the first row here, is, I don't know if you can read those, Lola Snively, Vicki Howard, and Nancy Schutz. And the reception and decorating committee, which you're about to meet, Vicki Howard again, Lola Snively, and Julie Snyder put that together. And our pianist tonight was Carol Holmberg. We were going to have a violinist, but she got sick, so she was not able to participate tonight. And our media was run by our pastor, Zach Kellner. Appreciate all of his hard work. And our church builder, who is here tonight, that built our little church here, put that banner together, Rich Brenner. And that was a job. I had to send him a lot of photos. No, that's not good enough. So we finally got it. But anyways, one thing I want to leave you with, and I found this other verse, that one of the evenings that I went to the old church on Boulder Street, there was nobody in there, but there was light shining from the lights next door. And I could see the light through the stained glass windows and everything. And I thought, well, this really kind of symbolizes that church, even though it's not serving as a church anymore, but this church has been, and we are now, the light of the world. So that completes the presentation. Well, I'm not quite done. So you can give yourselves a hand for being part of this group all these years. And as you leave, if you can't find your car, it's the red and white one. And then we do have a reception that's a dessert social tonight. And these are a couple of pictures that was given to me by some of you know. Help me with that. I lost her. Joyce Smith. And her family came from Sweden. That was a photo from around 1920 of her family celebrating, and she's not sure who the one that is holding the pie dessert. So that's going to be next. And I think we have time for one more hymn that originated in Sweden. And so Carol is going to play, and Claudine, or Carlotta, is going to lead us in this one final hymn, and then the pastor will close the service, and we will move on to the reception.
I know that you know this one, and this is also written and as a hymn that came to us from Sweden. So we are going to have the words on the screen, right? You don't need them, probably. Sorry. Yeah, are the words going to be on the screen? Okay, you know it. Would everyone stand, please, and sing with us the first and last verses of How Great Thou Art? Oh, Lord, my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. And when I think that God his Son not sparing sent him to die, I scarce can take it in, that on the cross my burden gladly bearing, he bled and died to take away my sin. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
Well, I learned something tonight. I'm on the green one, Zach. I learned something tonight. The year that the church's name was changed is the year that I was born. Whether there's any significance in God's eternal plan in that or not, I have no idea, but it's an interesting thing. And shortly after we arrived here, we were talking to Mrs. Headland, and we found out, as we shared our stories together, that the Headlands were very good friends with the very first pastor I had in the Evangelical Free Church in Milton, New Jersey, and he was actually the pastor I served as a youth pastor under. So strange connections, and the world is small, and God weaves our lives together in strange ways, doesn't he? And he was a Bloomquist, yes. Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. So anyway, we learned about our church history tonight, and the past is wonderful, but we don't rest on our laurels. We have a wonderful future. We are working toward another relocation project, and as I think it was Carlotta said tonight, who knows what the people will be looking at 100 years from now and saying, "Oh, those strange-looking people in those pictures. Boy, they dressed funny in those days, didn't they?" So let's close, and then we invite you to join us in the gym for some refreshments. Father, we do again thank you for the rich history of First Evangelical Free Church, and we thank you that we have the privilege of being a part of the ministry of this church in this present day. Continue to bless us and use us, Lord, for a light in this community and also throughout the world. And just continue to provide for us. Lord, we look and we see how amazing your mighty deeds were even 100 years ago as you provided finances and people and opportunities for the church. We know you'll do it again. So, Lord, you provide and you bless, and we will follow and serve you. In Jesus' name, amen.